Kevin Durant comes back for the Nets. It's all looking good. They're humming along. It's looking like a team that has just brought back like the Phoenix out of the fire. And then it all slips away from the Nets late. We're going to talk about the way the game started, the way the game was in the middle, and unfortunately, the way the game ended. All that right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR.com. If you need something for DraftKings or FanDuel, some projections for NBA, MLB, if those guys ever come back, NFL, obviously, all well and done and over. But we got you covered. Really, every single player playing on every single slate. So go over and check out DFSR. Really appreciate that. No Adam Armbrecht here on this one. Probably happy to not be on the podcast following this one. I think there was probably a point during this game where, you know, he's off tonight, had some other stuff to do, but there's probably a point in this game where I thought maybe he'll change his mind. Maybe he'll jump back in. Maybe he will, run back from what he had to do tonight and make sure he could jump on the podcast early on, because it's looking like it's going to be that kind of podcast. It's looking like it's going to be that kind of sort of celebration moment that one Mr. Kevin Durant is back for the Nets. We knew this was coming. We knew that he had been taken off of the injury report on Wednesday and that he was going to be back here playing against the Heat on Thursday in a game that's been a long time coming. The Nets have sorely needed him back in the mix. They've been sort of not drowning without him, but really darn close, head basically just a little bit above the water, but not by much ever since he went back down back in January. And then you get the news that he's not even going to be on a minutes limit. Maybe they're going to monitor they're going to monitor his minutes and see how they go from Jacques Vaughn and company. Steve Nash is still out in COVID protocols, and things look really good. You're feeling really good about this game. You see Jimmy Butler and PJ Tucker are not going to play. PJ Tucker, the known I'm not going to call him a Kevin Durant stopper. I'll call him a Kevin Durant annoyer more than anything else. If we think back to the Milwaukee series from last year, where he just, was basically just in Kevin Durant's shorts the entire series. Durant had an amazing series, but it wasn't easy because PJ Tucker is just that kind of defender that's going to give him fits. And then you take away arguably the Heat's best player in Jimmy Butler. Maybe you want to debate whether it's him or Bam Adebayo. It doesn't really matter. They're still going to be without, wherever you rank them, one of their two best players. I'll just call him their best player in Jimmy Butler. And you think to yourself, okay, this is just the kind of game we want to get Kevin Durant back in for. It may be even an easy win. It's going to be a game against a lot of Heat backups. There's no Kyle Lowry either, by the way. So all of a sudden they're down 3 of their 5 starters. And you still got Tyler Hero coming off the bench for the Heat. So you start thinking as a Nets fan, okay, this is looking pretty good. They're in a good spot. Going to get arguably, when he's at his best, the best player in basketball back on the court. Going to start getting him integrated with the pieces on this team, specifically the new ones. First time to see how that's all going to operate together. And man, it looked really good to start this game. They start Goran Dragic. So Jacques Vaughn makes some adjustments here with the starting lineup. Goran Dragic starts with Seth Curry, Kevin Durant, obviously Bruce Brown, who's been playing really well. We'll talk about him later, and Andre Drummond. And right from the start, you're thinking, right when you see them play, they're playing with massive energy. The ball is zipping around. You can already tell that Kevin Durant brings this, just like you have in a sense that when you're out there on the court with him, that like you're just going to play better because things are going to get easier. We talked about this yesterday around the gravity that he commands in terms of what he brings from defensive pressure that can alleviate the pressure on other shooters. And we saw how that was going early. Dragic looked really good. Talk about him in a little bit. Seth Curry, he had a rough one, but he was definitely getting some open looks to start. Bruce Brown, like the cutting game works a lot better with him because areas of the court start opening up. They just start opening up because when you have to defend Kevin Durant around the perimeter, especially with 1.5 to 2 defenders, if you're really blitzing him, there's just going to be this opening seams that are all over the court. And it starts off so great. So great. 35-23 at the end of the first quarter. Miami does make a little run in the second quarter, but there was a point in the second quarter where the Nets were up 16. I texted Adam saying this thing, effectively, I can't say exactly what I said because it's a little, wouldn't pass the is this a clean episode or not? But effectively it said we're killing these guys. And it just looked like the Nets were going to be all downhill in a game. Maybe, and I started even thinking, maybe we'll get Kevin Durant a little rest in this one. Maybe we won't have to push his minutes. We're monitoring the minutes. Okay. We don't want to really push him all the way back. He hasn't played in months, or, hasn't played at game speed in months. He's been practicing, obviously, for the Nets. And these are the thoughts that are going through my head. Patty Mills looks like he's completely solved. He's draining threes. We've been, worried about his shot from beyond the arc. He ends up going 4 for 5, was 4 for 4 in the first half, and just looked like he was never going to miss again. Right back to the old Patty Mills from the beginning of the season. And as Nets fans, I think, and Nets folks, we're all looking at this first half and thinking, okay, are the championship odds ticking back up? Right? Like, should I go over to Bet Online and see if the odds for the Nets are ticking up just in this very moment? Because that's how I'm feeling. Like, I'm feeling this way around the team as I'm watching the ball circulate, as I'm watching all these shots become easier for the team, as the offense looks like it clicks right out of the gate. This is what's happening right from the jump, basically. And it's looking like everything you've been sort of waiting for these couple months that he's been out, that Kevin Durant specifically has been out. And no Kyrie Irving, no problem, it kind of seems like. This is what we're doing this is what we're going to do here. There's a Heat team that's undermanned. No problem. We can deal with Tyler Hero. We can deal with Bam Adebayo on his own. Max Strus, Omar Yurtseven, they start him. They ditched that pretty early, and because that wasn't working. They made the adjustment that ended up being correct. And so it becomes this game of two halves, because the first half, like I said, is, I think you're thinking as a Nets fan, you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is what I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for Kevin Durant to get back on the court because this will solve a lot of our issues. And it really did to begin with, not for the whole game, unfortunately. Because, and if you want to take away a positive from the game, we see, okay, we can see how this is going to work. We can see how the offense, when it's right and when these pieces are together, it can really start humming. They can get out in transition, which they did all basically the entire first half. Use the defensive intensity to get out in transition as much as possible. Get Bruce Brown getting out in transition. You got Goran Dragic turning the corner a lot on defenders and opening up space for the driving kick, which which you're kind of in love with in terms of what he can bring. And it starts with Kevin Durant, but all these little pieces are clicking together early, and then, God, it all falls apart. Miami makes some specific adjustments. We'll talk about that here in a second, but they make some specific adjustments that the Nets were not able to solve. The Nets were aware of it. I mean, everyone's aware of what was happening here. And the counter moves to these adjustments just weren't happening at all. And what happens is we get a game where you kind of walk away a little Charlie Brown like slump shoulders over with the George Winston music playing in the background, thinking to yourself, not George Winston. I forget who did the Peanuts guy. I'll come to before they get to the end of this, but you get to this moment where basically, into the third quarter, into the fourth, where you just start to think, wow, they've kind of thrown it all away. So we'll talk about what happened in this one, where the game got away from them, what adjustments were made on both sides of the ball that ended up ending up with this result, which is really, really, really disappointing. This could have just been sort of a celebration. First game back in Barclays. Kevin Durant's back. We got a little bit of a gift with the Heat team that did not bring their A game, or their A team. They brought their A game. They didn't bring their A team to it. And we're going to walk away with a W to start turning this ship around. And ultimately 113-107, and it gets away from them. So I want to talk about some of the stuff the Heat did. I want to talk about some of the adjustments or non-adjustments that the Nets made as well. First, gotta talk to you about our friends over at Bet Online. I mentioned Bet Online a minute ago because that's where I was going to be running to look for the championship odds that the Nets are going to be. I'll tell you right now, I'm sure on Bet Online. They have not changed after this game. I don't think they probably went down at all either. They definitely didn't go up, but that's okay. Bet Online is the betonline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. They got basketball. They got the NCAA really starting to speed up here as we get into March. We know how much fun March can be. BetOnline's got you covered for all of that. Hockey, boxing, UFC. You head on over to the website today, betonline.net. Use your mobile device. Learn about the trends and actions they have going on over there. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so what happens here? What happens is pretty obvious, and in sort of a macro sense, and we can break down sort of on a micro idea around what happened. The game gets away from the Nets because they really can't solve. This is one problem. They can't solve the Heat zone. The Heat played almost primarily zone throughout the second quarter and then basically the entire second half in an effort to kind of shut down some lanes that the Nets aren't going to be able to get into because they're not going to overcommit to Durant. They really pressured high. They pressured high on the ball. Whoever the ball handler was, bringing the ball over midcourt basically the entire second half. I mean, not every single possession, but in a lot of half court sets, that pressure started very, very early, whether it was Dragic bringing it over, whether it was Durant, really Cam Thomas at times. The primary ball handler and point of attack became a real problem in that zone for the Nets to the point where they were not able to get back into any kind of flow like they had in the first half. So if you picture this game and how the game went, think about the amount of spacing, the amount of ball movement, the amount of cutting that was happening in the first half and how that basically just disappeared in the second half. One of the primary reasons for that is this zone that Miami went to, knowing that on an individual defender basis, they were not going to be able to handle a lot of what the Nets had, specifically like guys like Durant. And then Dragic was beating his individual defender a lot in the first half, and all that kind of dried up. And the Nets really just couldn't make any adjustment or didn't make any adjustments off of it. The ball stagnated. They weren't able to get into spacing. They did miss some easy shots. There was times where they were able to sit guys down into the middle of that zone. We saw it a couple times with Aldridge where he gets kind of sort of quintessential LaMarcus Aldridge looks from the mid-range, and they just rattled out. I think he probably had 2 or maybe even 3 balls that look like they're all the way down and just couldn't go in. Felt like that kind of night for him. I think he only took 5 shots total, but they were all pretty good looks. Maybe one was at the end of the shot clock. And they just, ends up going 1 for 4. They were able to sit Bruce Brown a few times down into that zone. He held up pretty admirably. He went 8 for 13 from the field. You really liked what you saw with him, specifically on offense when they were able to get him onto that short roll at times. He was able to hold up. But in general, the Nets failing came here because 2 things. 1, they couldn't solve the zone, but then 2, the way at times they were trying to solve the zone because the game really gets away from them in the third quarter. Miami goes 28, outscores them 28-17 in that stretch. And we just had too many minutes of guys like Aldridge who were just too slow for this matchup. Because you think about what happened. They start Omar Yurtseven and they just ditch that almost immediately to go and end up starting Caleb Martin in the second half instead of him, who ends up playing 37 minutes. So what you're getting is you're not getting the benefit on the offensive end because Aldridge's not hitting any of these, like he's not hitting any mid-range or really even getting many opportunities off of it. All of a sudden there's not as much spacing. They're not really able to attack the zone in any meaningful way just because Miami starts closing gaps. They're really able to rotate defenders pretty well. The closeouts look pretty good. And all of a sudden, these shots that were coming very easy in the first half dry up. And then on the defense, my God, if you can see me on YouTube, like I just probably basically just rolled my eyes because the defensive piece was so slow on the other end. Because 1, Miami's getting out into transition because the Nets can't hit any shots, right? So the Nets can't hit shots. And now you get this cascading downward sort of thing that's happening where the Nets can't make anything on offense. And then they're getting a little bit cross-matched going the other way. They're not able to set into a good, solid half-court defense a lot for the third quarter. And then guys like Aldridge James Johnson are just getting killed on back cuts where they're spreading the floor out. They're bringing Bam Adebayo up to start initiating action, right? With a lot of dribble handoff stuff, little like stop and pitch, sort of actions around the top of the key. And then they just get back cut to death toward the basket, what felt like over and over and over again in the third quarter. And it's just like these little death by 1,000 paper cuts things that are happening because the adjustment that Jacque Vaughn made on the offensive end is not working at all. And now it's really, really bad on the defensive end where it's just kind of nothing's going right. Drummond got played out of the game early for a lot of these reasons. He had some foul trouble, but he was just way too slow for the matchup, like 100% too slow for this kind of thing. If Bam's going to be the 5 for this team, Drummond in that like trying to drop coverage and trying to stick with Bam, especially if he has to start that stuff at the top near the top of the key, is going to be really, really tough for him. So he's basically played out of it. Aldridge wasn't much better. The James Johnson minutes were kind of a train wreck, 4 fouls in 12 minutes, and he was getting killed on defense too. And that's really where the game starts to get away from them in the second half, was these kind of minutes. These like any kind of like Biggs adjustment that they were trying to make. We got a little bit of Claxton, who I actually thought played okay in his minutes, but this other stuff just wasn't working at all. It was terrible. And you can see it in the moment. You can see it happening in the moment where when it looks like your team's in quicksand around defense, it means the defensive personnel is not correct. And there's lack of communication at times about who was supposed to take back cutters. There's lack of communication about who's supposed to rotate. The closeouts were really terrible because the other thing about Miami is they move the ball so well that they're going to just have open shooters at times. Guys like Max Strus, guys like Duncan Robinson. Robinson didn't kill them as much, but he's a threat. And you're going to have to rotate to pick these guys up in your rotations. And if you're not there right in the second, you're going to get killed. Max Strus 6 for 12 from 3. Almost all of them were clean looks, right? Caleb Martin 3 for 5 from 3. A lot of them were clean looks. A couple bailouts near the end of shot clocks, but for the most part, you can't look at those as like the reason they lost the game. So it really was this double-edged, terrible sword of really kind of the wrong lineup combinations for this specific, very small and pretty quick Miami team that they just countered with bigger and slower guys. And there was an adjustment the Nets made late, which I'll talk about here in a second, that actually did worked perfectly, like kind of just the way you would have thought it would, except they just made it too late in the game. And it was a too little, too late situation on that. So they end up making the adjustment sort of that should have happened much, and I would say much 1,000 times earlier. But it just comes at a point in the game where they tried to make a run. They did storm back. It's looking like they're going to be able to get into it, or looking like they may even be able to win it, really, because they were at a point where they probably could have and maybe even should have won the game. But when they were probably a minute or two too late on this adjustment, maybe even 3 minutes too late on it, and ultimately the game slips away. I'll talk about what that is here in a second. First, talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. It's that time of year. New Year's resolutions. I don't know where you are with your New Year's resolutions. I went through a down period and then I'm kind of ticking back up into sort of the healthier lifestyle. Built Bar is a big reason for this because it just takes away some of the temptation you can get around other kinds of snacks, especially those super sugary things that can look really, really inviting. Built Bar kind of takes the place of that, and you have the stats to back it up. They're a protein bar covered in chocolate. They really concentrated on the flavors. They make it super easy to just grab one and go. You can use it as a meal replacement if you want. If you're going to the gym and you need a pick-me-up, Built Bar is perfect for that as well. They're low calorie, high protein. Like I said, you replace those sweet treats in your life with Built Bars, you'll be good to go. The stats to back it up: 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar: 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, a dozen net carbs. You can't even hear it, folks. Then the flavors: coconut almond, mint brownie. You get the new white chocolate cookies and cream as well. You go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, what they do at the end of this game, They put Kevin Durant at the 5. I don't know why this was not done earlier. I don't know, when you're down and you're struggling to score and you're struggling in the defensive end and you're just losing and the game is slipping away, not going KD at the 5 with all shooters in an effort to get back into the game earlier is mystifying to me. It was not working with these bigs. Like I said, if you saw something different, let me know. I don't know what that would have been, but it was just a situation where you needed to get as much scoring on the court. And what we saw happen was two things happened late in the game. They put Kevin Durant in the 5. They surround him, Goran Dragic, Patty Mills, Seth Curry, and Bruce Brown. And then what happens? All of a sudden, Miami they're not getting back cut anymore because these defenders, they're playing against small guys anyway. Like this Miami team's not they weren't throwing out. This isn't like, 5, 6, 10 guys standing around the perimeter. They're a pretty guard heavy, sort of like smaller wing heavy group too. So all of a sudden the Nets are flying around on defense. Yeah, they're a little bit undersized, but this Miami team's not going to kill you on that, because mostly what you want to stop is getting guys behind you on defense and getting guys standing wide open at 3. Wide open from the 3-point line. And that's the kind of thing that can happen when you just put faster defenders on them. When you just have one faster guy, 2 faster guys, anybody that can just whip around the court and make decisions a little faster than guys like Aldridge and Drummond and James Johnson can. And then we saw the Nets start to storm back with a few minutes left. And they actually got some really good defensive stops. Bruce Brown gets a block at the 3-point line. That's a couple of games in a row for him on that. He was excellent. I can't really put this at Bruce Brown's doorstep at all. And then they're able to score too, because now they're able to get just that one more ball handler on the court. They're able to kind of penetrate the zone. They're able to get a couple outside looks. And all of a sudden it's looking a lot like it's just easier on offense, because it is, because they're just able to spread the court. They're completely 5 out with this unit, because now that Bruce Brown is actually able to hit a 3, or he went 3 for 4 from 3. He's been excellent. So now all of a sudden you're playing a real 5 out offense, and they come storming back to make it a game. And why this wasn't done earlier, I'll just never know. It just didn't make, even when they interviewed at halftime, there was with Ott, they said, we're having trouble with their zone. Like, it was just, look, these guys know this. These guys are basketball geniuses. If you sit on a coaching staff, like, you're just a basketball genius. Even if you're assistant coach, like, that's just the truth. You don't get to these spots. The way to synthesize, like, sort of stuff in the moment on a basketball level is super hard. So all these guys understand what's happening, but it just didn't get made until it was too late. And I think, the final move, let's see, Aldridge is in the 4-minute mark. Yeah. So the 4-minute mark, they bring Dragic in for Aldridge, and that's when they're playing that group. It's 109-100, and they get it back all the way to 109-107, I believe, with that group, where it's looking like, okay, they're back in. Yeah, 109-107 when Durant hits his second free throw with 2 minutes left. That's when Bruce Brown gets the block. They're within 2, and that's when Katie rims out the 3-pointer. That looks like it's all the way down. And you're like, that's feeling like that probably was the game right there, right? Like, he gets a pretty good look from 3. The ball's all the way down, it seems like, and it doesn't come out. It would have given them the lead. And that's kind of, they don't know the game's over at that point, but you're feeling it. But you just think to yourself, 90 more seconds of this lineup, do they win the game? Maybe, right? 2 minutes left. And by the way, it's not even a Durant thing. Like, because it's not even like a Durant's already been in the game at this point. So it's not like it's a minutes managing around Durant. It's just the wrong combination of guys. Like I said, they're down 9 when they make the move to get Aldridge out of the game, and they're within 2 within a minute and a half against a Heat team that made no adjustments, by the way. Like, I mean, I guess they brought Bam back in for Dwayne Dedmon. Oh no, that was like a real quick switch because of the jump ball, right? So, like, I just don't know. I don't know. It's frustrating. This is why the game is frustrating, because you think to yourself, there was a world where the Nets could take this one. There's a world where this should have been a win. This is Kevin Durant back on the court for the first time in months. They're winning by 16 points in the first half. It's a game that they could have just maybe walked to victory, and they just didn't. Credit to the Miami Heat. This team fights really hard. There's a reason Eric Spoelstra is one of the best coaches, if not the best coach, and he probably just is the best coach in basketball. This is a team that fights hard every single night, no matter what their personnel is. Does not matter if they're missing one guy or all their guys. This is a team that just kind of has an idea of what they want to do. They're quick to make adjustments. They're quick to see what's working and what isn't. They're quick to stick with things that are working or ditch them if they're not. And that's what you saw from this Heat team. And you just didn't see it in the same way from the Nets squad tonight, I don't think. Especially because we know that there was a combination that did work. Because we know there was a combination, and we could see it. We talked about this. We're all talking about this in the moment, right? We see there's a combination that's going to have a much better chance of success against what specifically the Heat are doing, and they just couldn't do it. They couldn't pull the trigger on it. They tried. I think I don't mind the initial effort, but not going super small earlier ended up being the death knell for the team. So really disappointing. Hate to see it. Would love to have gotten this game a first win from just a first win from Kevin Durant being back. It would have seemed fitting, especially the way that they came out of the game, or excuse me, how they came out of the gate, to say, like, because you see the upside, you see what he brings to the team. Like, you see how these other guys can just sort of vibe off what's happening, and how they all kind of feel like they get like this little boost. They all feel like they all can become better basketball players because they're playing with Kevin Durant. They're about to maybe steal a game from a Heat team that's kind of punting it because they're on the second half of a back-to-back. Like, all this stuff looks like it's going to click together. All this stuff that looks like it's just going to be sort of a perfect matchup for a win, and ends up not being the case. So we are headed into an interesting stretch for the Nets. Adam and I talked about it yesterday, where they play the next 3 games on the road. So in theory, we're going to have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving both together. Over here, they play Sunday, 1 p.m. against Boston. Then they play Charlotte on Tuesday, and then they play Philly on Thursday. We know we're not getting Ben Simmons back before those games, but this is now, again, a pretty critical 3-game stretch for the Nets, who you would like to see them take all 3 games, just because, one, they kind of need to keep winning because of where they sit in the playing game. And then 2, by the way, good on Detroit. Detroit beat the Toronto Raptors tonight in Toronto to keep that a little bit closer, at least in terms of the play. And that was a game that Toronto definitely should not have lost, probably. But then it hurts a little more because we were thinking to yourself, oh, we could have broken this a little closer to get within striking distance of Toronto, except the Nets couldn't do it either. They drop their third in a row when it's all said and done. All right. Go on over to YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. I'll put that link in the show notes. Make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast as well. Going to do probably a couple appearances on some other stuff over the weekend, so keep an eye out over for that. Probably going to pop on a couple other Nets related things. I'll put it out there once I just make sure it happens, but I'm pretty sure that's going to happen tomorrow. So might get a bonus episode on Saturday if that ends up happening. So keep an eye on the podcast feed, because I'm pretty sure we're going to do that. Thanks again for making Locked On Nets your first listen of the day. Much appreciated. Adam is the one that's usually out of here with the quotes. So I'll just say, can't wait to hear from one of those all-time great American poets next time around. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.